Hey guys, Pat here from Rain Country. God is good all the time. Today yesterday I've been working on some little doors for the deck. And the reason for the doors is to keep the chickens off the deck. Well, if anybody who has chickens know how messy they can be, and we don't want chickens on the deck. I am taking and making these doors. I got another one to make. I'll glue it up and take you guys along for the ride. A little bit of head scratching and trying to figure out the dimensions and sizes, and first time dealing with these hinges like this. All you have to do is push the door one way or another. It's a two-way hinge. So we'll take you in the shop and show you how I'm assembling the other door. Okay guys, here we are in the shop, and I have the other door laid out. I used lap joints to fasten the stiles and rails together. I'll give you a close-up look of what this looks like in case you're wanting to do something like this. And the other side's the same, except for the arc on the top is going to be shaped differently. And the bottom's just straight cuts. We just have lap joints and a dado. And then the panels for the inside. Square cuts on the bottom. And you can make these with several different boards, or I just had a couple of boards that fit together, scrap pieces, and this is what I ended up with. The door outside that's already hung has 3 boards in it, so just whatever it takes to fill up the inside and the insides of the grooves here. So what I might add here is that the wider the boards that you have, like in the wintertime you're going to have more moisture, more cool weather, and so these boards are going to want to shrink and swell, so you're going to want a little bit of room in between the boards. You're going to want a flexibility, so you don't want to have them fitting really snug and tight. The other thing is that if you have wide boards, they're going to have a tendency to want to maybe cup or bow on you, so just keep that in mind. It's probably a better idea to cut narrower boards. I'll probably be kicking myself for using 2 wide boards, but we'll see how it goes. I'm sure that they're going to cup and they're going to warp on me a little bit in and out of season, but I also want to take and put a sealer on these so that it also helps to inhibit any moisture being sucked up into the board, and then in the summertime them drying out. So anyway, these are about as dry as they can be. I've had these in the shop for a long time, so I'll go ahead and do a couple of mock-up boards here and show you kind of how I did everything. So here's that piece that goes on the top. That's that arc piece that you see, and I got that out of a piece of 2x8. Technically speaking, it's a finished size board, so it was 7.5 by 1.5 piece of cedar. I started out with 3.5 inch wide boards running up the side, or 3.5 inch stock, and so I wanted that arc to fit into a 2x8. So what I did is I drew down 3.5 inches from the very top of the 2x8 down 3.5 inches. Then I started my arc down here on the corner. This is before I had the lap joint part cut out, and then I drew a line or an arc up to that corner. Then I took and put little reference marks. I measured up 3.5 inches all along this arc that I drew. I put little tick marks at 3.5 inches all the way across the board, clear to the from one end to the other, and then I drew another arc, and so that gave me my layout for that top board. So then I took this as one single board. Just bear in mind that this is one board. So now at the bandsaw, I just went ahead and cut the shape out followed my line all the way through, like so, and of course cut along that line. And then again, I didn't throw these boards away here. I'll show you the reason why in a few minutes. So now that this piece is cut out, now I can go over to the radial arm saw and show you what I did next. Now some of you guys might argue, and it would be a good argument, that, well, Pat, how come you just didn't draw the lines on here and then just go over to the radial arm saw while this is one solid piece of wood? Well, I didn't do that because it would have cut away my line that I had going through here. Not a big deal. A guy can improvise either way. But this way was just as easy for me. I could just bring all these pieces back over to the radial arm saw. I mean, I could stick all this together and cut it out with the dado blade just as easy. One thing I want to point out is when I did cut this out, I set the dado blade up halfway from one end to the other. So we have 1.5 inches, so that is 3/4 of an inch to the center of the board. So I got the blade set up 3/4 of an inch off of the work, or off of the bottom of the board. So when I make my cuts through here, the cuts will be exactly halfway. So when you go to put your laps together, this seam right here is going to be nice and flat all the way across. If that was a 1/16 high or 1/16 low, you wouldn't have a nice even transition from one board to the other. So that's why you want to go exactly halfway. And it's a good idea to take a scrap piece of wood and make your first cut. That's what I do all the time. And I make sure that when I surface all these boards down, I surface them all at the same time. The stiles, the rails, you know, sides and tops and bottoms. I do it all at the same time, run it through the planer, so everything is the exact same thickness. And then when I go through here, I take a piece of that scrap wood. I just take an arbitrary scrap piece of wood off of that same planing and get this blade at the exact height that I want it, because you can wheel this thing up and down and it doesn't take much to be off. So that's what I did. Just a tip. I had this all together. Then I proceeded to make cuts all the way across. Paying particular attention to where I was at 3.5 inches in. All the way across until I was finished with both sides. And you can see I use this as a template or a test piece to figure out how deep to run this dado joint in here. I'll take you over to the router table and show you what I did with that. So this is the best bit that I could come up with for this project. Sometimes you can get dado bits for your routers, but I don't have one. What those have is a roller on the bottom. When you go to put your work onto the bit, well, then it just naturally wants to stop at a certain depth. Well, I didn't have that option, so I built this little jig here out of a piece of, I think you call it UHMW, but a real thick plastic. I cut this shape out and then placed it at the depth that I wanted, so I knew how far in I wanted to go. And this is just simply a piece of angle iron with a couple of carriage bolts and wing nuts. I cut the inside panels at 5/8. So I had to cut this notch here, or this dado, I had to cut that a little bit wider than 5/8 to accommodate for shrinking and swelling. This particular cutter head is only 3/8 of an inch, so I had to set it up, and you can actually see where I had to flip this over. I first had to run this through one way and then flip it over and then run it through the other way. And as you can see, I didn't go all the way to the end, and the reason for that is that if I wouldn't go clear to the end, you would see a square notch out of the end of the board, and you would see that on the finished product. So I didn't want a hole here on the end of the board, so that's why you always want to stop before you get to the end. So again, I ran this through one way and stopped, pulled it away, flipped it around, and then came in from the other side. Now that I showed you how to cut out the most complicated one, the sides and bottom were cut out exactly the same way. So I haven't thrown these curved pieces away yet. I'm still going to use them. What I'm going to use them for is I'm going to use them for deciding how to cut the tops of these boards here. Obviously, we can take measurements between the sides and the bottom and determine the depth of our dado joint. So the depth of our dado joint was like 3/8 of an inch. So we want to add 3/8 of an inch to 26 3/8. So that gave me the length of the bottom to the top on each side. So obviously this board is going to be longer than this other side piece. So measuring from where the lap joint ends on the bottom to where the lap joint ends on the top, I had 28 7/8. So I'd add 3/8 to the top and 3/8 to the bottom, and then that'll give me a determination of where to start with an arc on this one and where to end with an arc on this one. Then I put a mark on each one of these boards, and then I could just take my piece that I cut out, go from one mark to the other, and that's draw a line. So then I just took this over to the bandsaw and then cut this out, and that made everything fit perfectly. The other thing to keep in mind is this length between the two lap joints, or should I say better off using the straight piece, the distance between where this lap joint starts or ends and where this lap joint starts or ends is 15 1/8. So I add 3/4 of an inch to the total width of these panels to make them fit in there. So 3/8 on this side, 3/8 on this side. So 3/8 on this side plus 3/8 on this side is this width plus 3/4 gives me the total width of these panels in order to make them fit inside these two boards here, and then make our tops and bottoms fit in like they should. The ends all come together. These boards are recessed into the frame. That's how all that goes together. So it's a nice warm day today. I am going to get this glued up inside the shop, and then I'm going to take it out on the deck and I'm going to let it dry. Now there's a couple of different ways a guy can do this. I'm going to simply glue it together. I could come in after the fact and put some real small carriage bolts in here and then fasten this together. If you wanted to take this apart, if you ever want to replace one of these inside panels or do some repair work on the door, it's going to be more difficult for me because I'm going to glue all this together with a waterproof glue. And this is just Titebond 3 Ultimate. I'll probably regret myself a few years down the road when I have to replace a panel or something like that, but I guess I'll just have to build new doors. But I'm hoping it's going to be stronger. There's going to be a lot of activity in and out of that gate, so I want them as strong as I can possibly make them. And I think putting fasteners on here is a good idea, plus the waterproof glue. And along with that waterproof glue, putting fasteners on there as well. Now, because this is going to make contact with wood, I'm going to take and put a little bit of glue right along this joint as well. Hope y'all can see that. Bear in mind, if the more boards you have on the inside, the harder it is to make that line up and fit together, because you have more boards to handle to try to get into that groove. So to hold those together, just use some quick clamps. The other thing that I wanted to point out on these joints is I cut the corner off of each one of these panels on the inside. Cut the corner off this panel in here to conform to that radius right there where I quit with the router bit. Again, you don't want to put any glue on the inside of this because you want this to have movement. Tap all that into place. Look on the bottom and on the top and make sure all your joints are in this way and in this way. Now you can use bar clamps and suck that in a little tighter if you want to, but I don't see the necessity in that. Those joints look pretty good. The last important thing that I need to do here is make sure that that bottom is square. It's just got a little bit of slop in here. So then I pull this in together a little bit, so this doesn't have any movement. See how that has movement? Now I got to pull it the opposite way because I pulled it the wrong way to start with is what I did. There we go. That's a nice tight fit. So we'll suck these down nice and tight. So I just take a t-shirt rag and wipe off any of the excess glue. Sure you get the bottom joints too. Just because you can't see them now won't mean you won't be able to see them later. And after all the handling I did there, it moved on me a little. Now some guys would argue to put the fasteners on at the same time you put the glue on, and that's a good argument. Matter of fact, that's the best thing to do. I don't have the fasteners with me, and I'm not sure that I want to put fasteners on here, but what that would do for me if I had the fasteners here, that it would suck the glue in nice and tight, and I'd just go ahead and be able to eliminate the quick clamps at that point and just go ahead and hang the door and put it in service. But I don't have the fasteners. I'm not sure that I want to use the fasteners. I'm going to see how it goes just with the glue, see how it weathers. This is going to be kind of a test for me, and also to see if down the road I need fasteners, I'll go ahead and put them on. Okay, while that's drying, I wanted to show you these hinges. Again, these are hinges that open and close inwards and outwards. They're spring loaded, so they open very far to the left and very far to the right. I'd say 360 degrees, because if you start from a zero axis and this is at 80 degrees the opposite way, you can go 180 degrees this way and 180 degrees this way. I'll show you these hinges in the unloaded position. That's how they look. Now the way you hook these up, you can see I got these on a couple of 1-inch boards. This is a 1-inch fir. When you go in and out of the door, they just automatically swing shut the way they're supposed to, but they are flexible out this way as well. Now the way you spring load these is you have this little rod that they send you. There's different holes around the edge of this thing. Whenever you get your hinge installed where it's supposed to go, in this particular configuration, you want to have the holes installed where they're straight up, not on the bottom, but you want the holes at the top. Once you get your mounting screws in there, you can see right there I just have a couple long ones. They give you 3/4 inch ones, but I went with longer ones. The screws I actually had these on hand, and these are 1.25 inches, and the ones they give you, which would probably work, were 3/4. but I want to have a little bit more holding power. I'm going into softwood, I'm going into cedar, so I wanted a little bit more holding on the wood. So that's the reason I went with the longer screws. When you get your hinges and your door all mounted, there's little pins that they give you. You get 4 of these. You take the tension, you take and roll this back, and there's different loadings for this. You can make it stiffer if you want. See, there's another hole back in here, like for a heavier door, or if you want that door to be stiffer to open and close. Inside here there's a spring that you're actually loading. I just went to the lightest load I could. I needed this measurement here to determine how wide to make those doors. So as you can see, these 2 barrels are wider than the hinge point in here. With this 1-inch material, I'm dealing with, well, 1.5 and a 4x4. I don't want to cut my door down to a 1-inch door and have it fit in there flush. I can use a thin piece of cedar and build this out a little bit and have that go flat against the 4x4, so I can center the hinge on the 4x4. So for example, this is a 4x4. Imagine this being vertical, and this is what I'm going to fasten my gate to. I could go and build that out a little bit to get my door and hinge exactly center to the 4x4 if I want to, and then use those 1.25-inch screws to penetrate this piece of wood and the nailer or the board that I want to fasten the hinge and door to. So with this hinge in the unloaded position, I could go and fasten the hinge like that, and that would give me one way to mount the door and hinge in the center of the gate post. But what I elected to do is go with the hinge on here. So let's say this is the top and this is the bottom or down towards the ground. You're going to want the loading holes towards the top of the post, and what I elected to do is just mount the hinge close to the edge where the rise starts to where the flat comes into this radius right here, and where the radius starts is where the corner of the post is going to be. So I just mounted it flat in here like this, and then likewise with the door and the back side of the door. And I actually mounted the hinge on the door before I mounted it on the 4x4, and you'll see that later on in the video when we go to attach the door. So with this, with the hinge in the unloaded position, you can mount the door in the same type of configuration, flat part on the door edge, and where the radius starts, and where that radius starts, that will be the corner of your door and the corner of that radius. And then you mount, you just put your 1.25-inch screws right inside there, and then go to the post and do the same thing. Mount that there, shut your door, and load your hinge. Now the door protrudes out a little bit. I don't mind that look myself. If you don't like that look, you can virtually have the door right in the center of your gate post, but you'd have to build this out again. You'd have to come in with something like this again on this side and on this side, and then mount your door like so. So your door would end up with a stair step in it. You could also take a router bit with a fillet, or you could take a router bit and round off this corner, and it would probably accommodate that just fine. You could also take this on a table saw and 45 your blade and take just take the corner off of here if you want to, but I didn't want to do that. I didn't think it would look right. So I'm just mentioning those different ways just to let you know that there are options. If you get creative, you can think of other options other than the ones I just shared with you. But that's just what I come up with today because I'd never fooled with these hinges before, and I wanted to kind of play with them a little bit to see what I can do with them. Okay guys, now it's the second day. I went ahead and removed the quick clamps from the corners of the door, and I sanded and rounded off the corners a little bit to take the sharp edges off all around the perimeter of the door. So what I have laid out here is I have a drill so I can pre-drill some holes. I have a little awl to where I can mark where I want to drill the pilot holes, and then I have a number 2 drill bit, 1¼ inch screws, 2 of those hinges. So I have this board here to raise the door up to match the elevation of this door, because I used this board simply to set underneath that door to hold it parallel with the deck here. The only trick you need to remember when you're using something like this is to make sure that your deck, all your decking boards or whatever your floor surface is going to be level all the way across. There's no humps, bumps, or screws or rocks or anything like that that's going to hold one end up or the other. It's not really critical where you put these hinges, just as long as it looks uniform from one door to the next, and from top and bottom things are kind of symmetrical. So that's kind of what I have going on there with this little piece of wood here. So we'll go ahead and get started. So the other door has the hinges running this way, so I'm going to have to duplicate that. So here we go again. Marking our holes with an awl. You can use a pencil or you can use a nail or anything like that to get your holes marked. An awl kind of gives you a little starter hole to work off of your drill bit. I like to pre-drill everything that I screw together. One, that helps the screw to go in better, and two, it keeps your wood from splitting. Now the cedar, it's a soft wood. I'm not really concerned about it splitting, but if I was to be using a hardwood like oak or something similar to that, the screw would be real difficult to penetrate the wood, and depending on how wide the wood is, it could split the wood. Pre-drilling takes a little more time, but I think you get better results in the end. Now I can load this one again. Now I'm going to place one of these boards under each hinge, because once I go to mount the hinge on the post, I'm going to have to take the load off, and that's going to bring the hinge floppy again. So basically these are going to act as a marker and a support and for accurate placement for that hinge. Now you can see these little sticks are mounted to the side of the post, and the bottom of the hinge will rest right on top of that high point on that piece of wood right there. And likewise with the lower side here, I got the same thing going on down here. Now we'll unspring or unload the hinges. Now with the hinges in their unloaded state, they can flop around. But when I go to rest the hinge on top of this marker right here, this support, then I'll know exactly where it needs to be in its loaded position. Okay, now we can have these references to work from. I have my shim. And for starters, what I'll do is I'll just put one screw in on the top. This hinge is totally dependent or resting on top of this wood. Putting the hinges on in the sprung position and taking measurements for this little support piece was critical in order to get the two gates the same height and the hinges in good respective positions to where they're not binding against each other. Now we'll remove our shim or support block that keeps our door at the right elevation, and look what would happen if I didn't have that up there. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and put in our little pins, load these hinges. Now, depending on how heavy your door is, one notch might not be enough, so you'll have to play with the door because it'll sag if it doesn't have enough tension on it to hold the weight of the door. Okay, that seems to work out pretty good. I got the adjustments done on the door, and everything seems to be functioning okay. The only issue I have is see if I can train a little dog into going through it. So now we can keep the chickens out and keep the dogs in and out, hopefully. And Cody is very attentive right now because I have a couple of little dog treats. And I'll see if I can get him to come through the door. You think he can come through the door? Huh? Come on, buddy. Come. He did it. Well, it looks like he can make it. I don't know if we have to put a dog treat out there every single time, but he's pretty smart. I think he can figure it out. They seem to function good. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Take care and God bless.